From the very first day at the academy, she carried a weight no one else did, the label of being the lowest cadet. It wasn't an official rank, but it felt just as real. The others laughed, whispered, and sometimes said it directly to her face. She wasn't the fastest in the runs, nor the strongest in lifting, and she often fell behind when drills pushed everyone to their limits. To her fellow cadets, that was enough to make her different, enough to make her the target of jokes and smirks. She felt it with every stumble and every missed mark. While others passed through drills smoothly, she stayed back, repeating the same tasks again and again, trying to match the pace. The instructors never called her by that title, but the silence when she failed, the sharp stares, and the sighs made her believe they thought the same. There were nights when she sat quietly on her bunk, too tired to even remove her boots, wondering why she was there in the first place. Others seemed born for the academy, their skills shining naturally. For her, every small achievement came at the cost of sweat, bruises, and hours of extra effort. Yet she refused to give up. Even when her hands shook from exhaustion, she would stand again, determined to finish what she started. The whispers of lowest cadet followed her everywhere. In the mess hall, in training grounds, even during moments of silence when no words were spoken. It was not just a nickname. It was a shadow clinging to her steps. And yet, deep inside, she carried something the others could not see. She had no special strength or speed, but she had patience. She had a heart that would not break, no matter how heavy the label felt. Day after day, she kept showing up. She kept running, kept lifting, kept learning, even when failure seemed to greet her more often than success. Every sunrise was another chance, another quiet promise to herself that she would not let their words decide her worth. She was the lowest cadet in their eyes, but in her own, she was simply someone who hadn't reached her full strength yet. And that belief, fragile as it seemed, would one day change everything. While other cadets advanced quickly, she often found herself stuck in the same place, struggling with things that looked easy for everyone else. When the drills ended for the day, most trainees laughed, relaxed, or left for the mess hall. But she stayed behind, quietly working on the basics that she still couldn't master. Her body ached, her hands blistered, yet she kept moving, repeating the same exercise until her muscles burned. It wasn't that she lacked effort. In fact, no one worked harder than her. But every mistake fed her self-doubt. She asked herself questions she couldn't silence. Was she truly meant to be here? Was she wasting time chasing something she would never reach? Those thoughts pressed heavily on her mind, especially when she compared herself to the others. They made everything look effortless, while she felt like she was dragging herself through mud. Some nights, she lingered in the training ground long after the lights dimmed, practicing in the shadows while the rest of the cadets slept. She repeated push-ups, ran laps, and practiced drills again and again, whispering small promises to herself. Just one more. Just one more. It wasn't about being the best anymore. It was about proving to herself that she would not break. The silence of those late nights was both comforting and crushing. Comforting because no one was around to laugh at her mistakes. Crushing because she felt invisible, like her efforts didn't matter, as if no one would ever notice. But deep inside, she hoped the extra hours would make a difference. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Her struggle was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, hidden in the background where no one paid attention. That was her way. She did not complain or explain. She simply worked in silence, carrying both her weakness and her will with the same steady grip. Each drop of sweat became a small step forward, even if it didn't feel like progress. She had no medals to show, no praise to celebrate, but she was building something greater, a resilience no one could see yet. And though she wrestled daily with self-doubt, her persistence was slowly shaping her into something stronger, preparing her for a future that even she couldn't imagine. Every mistake she made seemed louder than the rest. If another cadet stumbled, it was brushed off as a small error. But when she faltered, the whole room seemed to notice. Eyes would turn, whispers would rise, and the familiar sting of the label lowest cadet would return. It was not just a name. It was a shadow that followed her everywhere, cutting deeper than any physical punishment could. In group exercises, she often felt the weight of silent judgment. If her team failed a task, the blame seemed to fall on her shoulders, even when others had slipped too. Her steps were measured, her breath heavy, and her movements slower than the best among them. The comparisons never stopped. She saw them in the quick glances of her peers, in the way they paired off with each other, leaving her as the last choice. It hurt most during moments of instruction. When she raised her hand with a question, the impatient sighs around her spoke louder than any words. She felt small, as if her very presence was holding others back. That invisible pressure pushed against her daily, making her believe she was dragging more than just her own body. She was dragging the weight of everyone's expectations, too. The nickname stuck because it was easy to say and hard to erase. Lowest Cadet. It echoed in the halls, in the training fields, even in her own head. At times, she wondered if she had become exactly what they called her. Doubt dug into her, telling her that no matter how much effort she gave, she would always be at the bottom. And yet, beneath that pain, a quiet strength was forming. She began to notice something others didn't. Her mistakes taught her more than their successes taught them. Each slip forced her to find balance. Each failure made her repeat the lesson until it became part of her. What others laughed at became the very thing building her foundation. Still, the comparisons weighed heavily. Every day felt like a battle, not only with drills, but with the voices around her. She carried them like chains, but deep down she also carried a silent promise that one day, those same voices would see her differently. Quitting would have been the easier choice. Many in her place might have walked away, leaving behind the endless drills, the sharp words, and the crushing weight of failure. But deep inside, she carried a quiet resolve. She told herself that no matter how heavy the days felt, she would keep showing up. Every morning when the alarm rang before dawn, she fought the urge to stay in bed. Her body was sore, her mind tired, but she forced her feet onto the cold floor. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself. While others trained for applause, she trained for survival, not of the body, but of the spirit. During drills, she no longer chased the fastest cadets or tried to compete for the spotlight. Instead, she focused on her own steps, one repetition at a time. If she fell, she stood back up. If she failed, she tried again. Slowly, she began to see effort as its own reward. Each drop of sweat became proof that she hadn't given in. Her resolve was not loud. It wasn't the kind that drew attention. She didn't shout her determination or demand respect. It lived in the small choices, the decision to run an extra lap when no one asked, to practice longer when no one watched, and to hold on when everything inside begged her to stop. The applause never came. Her name was never called in praise, but she started to notice something else. While others celebrated quick victories and then moved on, her steady effort built a deeper endurance. She was learning the kind of strength that applause could never measure, the strength to continue without reward. Even in her weakest moments, she clung to one thought: effort matters. That belief became her shield against doubt. When the label of lowest cadet echoed in her ears, she reminded herself that showing up every day was already an act of defiance against those words. This quiet resolve didn't erase the struggles, but it gave her a reason to stay. And though no one realized it yet, this unseen strength was preparing her for challenges far greater than the academy. She wasn't there to impress the crowd. She was there to prove, first to herself, that she would not break. The day came when the cadets were sent out for survival training in the wild. For many, it was an exciting challenge. They talked about testing their speed, showing off their strength, and proving who was the toughest among them. But for her, it was not about showing off. It was about something far more personal. She knew her body was not the strongest, and her chances of standing out were small. To her, this trial was not about muscle, it was about spirit. The instructors dropped them deep into rough terrain with only the basics to survive. The ground was uneven, the air cold, and the forest stretched wide with no clear path. While others rushed ahead with confidence, she moved carefully, conserving her energy. Every step reminded her that this was more than a physical test. It was a battle with her doubts, her fears, and her will to keep going when everything seemed impossible. The harshness of the wild was immediate. Hunger arrived quickly and thirst pressed harder with every passing hour. Some cadets grew frustrated when their usual strength didn't solve every problem. She, on the other hand, relied on patience. She searched for water slowly, studied the ground for safe paths, and made do with whatever little she found. Nights were the hardest. The cold cut through her uniform, and the silence made her feel alone. She curled up by small fires, fighting the weight of exhaustion. In those hours, her thoughts turned loud. She questioned whether she would last, whether the whispers of lowest cadet would finally come true in the most unforgiving of places. Yet, as dawn broke each day, she rose again, telling herself she would not quit. Others measured success by how fast they built shelters or how much food they gathered. She measured it by one thing: endurance. Every day she lasted was a small victory. Each sunrise she faced became proof that spirit could carry her where strength alone could not. The wilderness was harsh, but within its trials, she found something hidden inside her. She learned that survival wasn't only about power. It was about patience, persistence, and the quiet decision to keep moving forward. And in that moment, the lowest cadet was already becoming something more. While searching for supplies in the dense forest, she moved slowly, scanning the ground for anything useful: sticks for fire, edible roots, or even dry leaves for shelter. The trial had already drained much of her strength, but she forced herself to keep walking. That was when she noticed a faint sound, almost too soft to hear at first. It wasn't the call of a bird or the rustle of branches. It was something smaller, weaker, almost like a cry. Curious, she followed the sound and soon discovered the source. Hidden between the roots of a fallen tree were tiny cubs, trembling and alone. Their eyes looked tired, their bodies frail, and their cries carried a helplessness that pierced her heart. They were abandoned, left with no one to care for them. Other cadets had passed this way before, and she realized they must have heard the same cries. But they chose to ignore them. To them, the cubs were nothing more than distractions, something that offered no points, no reward in the trial. But for her, it was different. She couldn't walk away. Kneeling down, she extended her hand carefully. The cubs recoiled at first, too weak to move, but still afraid. She sat there quietly, giving them time, showing them she meant no harm. Finally, one of them inched closer, nudging her hand gently. That small moment was enough. She knew she couldn't leave them behind. Even though her supplies were already limited, she shared what little food she had. She tore pieces of her ration, breaking them down to feed the tiny mouths. She gave them water from her own canteen, knowing she would have to endure thirst later. To her, their survival mattered more than her comfort. As she gathered them into her arms, she felt their fragile bodies press against her. It wasn't just about kindness, it was about responsibility. Something in her shifted. These cubs weren't part of the trial, but they became part of her purpose. Others might have seen them as a burden, but she saw them as a test of something greater than strength. For the first time, she understood that leadership didn't begin with power. It began with compassion, and in choosing not to walk away, she unknowingly stepped onto a path that would define who she was meant to become. Her rations were already running low. Every cadet knew how carefully they had to stretch their supplies to last through the survival trial. But when she looked at the cubs, frail, shivering, and weak, she didn't hesitate. She tore pieces of her food and placed them gently before them. Their small paws reached out, their hungry mouths chewing quickly, as if afraid the food might disappear. The others, if they had seen her, would have called it foolish. To give away food in the middle of a survival test was unthinkable. But for her, it was never about calculations. It was about doing what felt right. To walk away from the cubs would have been easy. To share what little she had required courage of a different kind. She didn't see it as a loss. She saw it as a duty, one she had chosen for herself. Every sip of water she gave them meant she would go thirstier. Every bite of food she offered meant her own stomach would ache longer. Yet when she saw them gaining strength, their cries softening into quiet whimpers of relief, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. At night, when the cold winds pressed against her, she curled around the cubs, shielding them with her own body. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she told herself it was worth it. For the first time since the academy began, she no longer measured her progress against other cadets. She wasn't chasing their approval or fighting to escape their label. She was simply protecting lives that needed her. The cubs began to follow her movements, their small steps unsteady but filled with trust. They didn't care about her speed in drills or her failures in training. To them, she was warmth, safety, and hope. And that trust meant more to her than any medal or praise could. Choosing compassion set her apart. Others might have seen her as weak for giving away what she needed most. But in truth, that choice revealed a strength deeper than physical power. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about keeping everything for yourself. It was about giving, even when it cost you something. And though she didn't know it yet, this choice would change how everyone saw her in the days to come. When the other cadets noticed how much time she spent with the cubs, they didn't see kindness. They saw weakness. Whispers spread quickly, turning into laughter behind her back. Some even mocked her openly, saying she cared more about animals than about surviving the trial. To them, she was wasting precious hours that could have been spent hunting for food, building stronger shelters, or proving herself in front of the instructors. The label lowest cadet returned, sharper than ever. Every joke and every smirk reminded her of the place they thought she belonged, at the bottom. Some cadets shook their heads at her as if she were hopeless. Others teased her directly, asking if she wanted to become a caretaker instead of a soldier. Their words carried no kindness, only mockery. Each insult cut deep, but she stayed silent. She didn't argue or defend herself. Instead, she let her actions speak. While they laughed, she was feeding the cubs. While they boasted about their quick wins, she was making sure the small lives under her care were safe. It wasn't that the ridicule didn't hurt. It did. But she had already chosen her path, and she would not turn away from it. At night, when the campfire glowed and conversations grew louder, she often sat quietly apart, the cubs huddled close to her. The others bragged about who had caught more food or who had built the strongest shelter, and sometimes they pointed in her direction, mocking how she wasted energy on something useless. Yet even as their voices echoed in her ears, she found comfort in the soft breathing of the cubs beside her. Their trust gave her strength, a reminder that compassion had its own value, even if no one else saw it. Ridicule was not new to her. She had lived under it since the first day of training. But now it didn't crush her as much as before. If anything, it hardened her resolve. The same voices that mocked her had once driven her to doubt herself. Now they only reminded her why she was different. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to prove, in her own quiet way, that true strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The storm came without warning. One moment, the forest was quiet. The next, the sky roared and the winds howled with a force that shook the ground. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the paths into streams of mud. Branches snapped, trees bent, and the once calm training ground became a place of chaos. Most cadets were caught off guard. Some tried to run for shelter, slipping and stumbling as panic set in. Others shouted to one another, their voices lost in the thunder. The storm exposed their weakness. Strength and speed meant little when fear took over. She felt the fear too, but she had something greater pulling her forward. The cubs clung to her legs, their tiny bodies shaking from the cold and the noise. She could have joined the others, racing for cover, thinking only of herself. But instead, she knelt down, gathering the cubs close, wrapping her arms around them as the rain soaked through her clothes. Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed steady. She searched the area carefully, her eyes scanning through the blur of rain and falling leaves. Moving slowly, she guided the cubs along a safer path, shielding them with her own body whenever the wind grew stronger. Every step was heavy, the mud pulling at her boots, yet she kept going. She didn't shout, didn't panic. She simply focused on getting them to safety. The other cadets noticed. Some, too frightened to think clearly, began to follow her path. They saw how she moved with purpose, how she kept calm when everyone else was scattered. Without realizing it, they started to trust her lead. Finally, she found a hollow beneath a cluster of rocks and trees, a place where the storm's force was weaker. She guided the cubs inside first, drying their small bodies with the edges of her own uniform. Then she gestured for the cadets who had followed to take shelter too. In that moment, something shifted. The lowest cadet was no longer the one slowing everyone down. She was the one holding them together. Calmness had replaced panic, and leadership had replaced ridicule. The storm tested everyone's strength, but it revealed her spirit. And for the first time, the others saw her not as the weakest, but as someone they could rely on. The storm raged on, and the once confident cadets found themselves disoriented. Paths they thought they knew were now flooded, and the shelters they had built collapsed under the weight of the heavy rain. Their strength, speed, and skills seemed useless when fear clouded their minds. For the first time, they had no clear direction. In the middle of this confusion, they noticed her. She wasn't shouting orders or demanding attention. She simply moved with purpose, guiding the cubs to safety, scanning the surroundings for the best routes, and staying calm even when thunder shook the ground. Something about her steadiness drew the others in. Without anyone deciding it, they began to follow. At first, it was just one or two cadets keeping close behind her steps. Then more joined, realizing she was making choices that worked. She avoided dangerous ground, found cover from the wind, and stayed alert to every sound. Slowly, the scattered group started to move together again, united not by rank, but by trust. She never once thought of herself as their leader. She didn't raise her voice or pretend to be stronger than she was. All she did was focus on what needed to be done. But in that crisis, that was exactly what made her different. She acted with care, not pride, and the others recognized it. The cubs clung to her side, but so did her fellow cadets now. They weren't following because they were told to. They followed because she gave them hope. Her calmness was like a light in the storm, something steady they could hold on to when everything else felt unstable. As they finally reached a safer place, the cadets looked at her in a way they never had before. The girl they once mocked for being the lowest had become their guide. She had stepped into a role without ever asking for it, proving that leadership doesn't come from titles or ranks. It comes from actions, from the choices made when everything falls apart. That night, as the storm began to quiet, the cadets sat close in the shelter she had found. No one laughed at her. No one mocked her. They simply watched her in silence, realizing she had carried them through the worst without even trying to lead. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the silence that followed. The cadets huddled together, exhausted and shaken. Yet beside her, the cubs refused to leave. They pressed against her legs, their small bodies trembling, but their eyes fixed on her as though she were their only shield against the world. At first, she thought it was only fear that made them cling. But as hours turned into the next day, she noticed something deeper. When others approached, the cubs stayed cautious, watching from behind her. But when she moved, they followed without hesitation. They trusted her steps more than their own instincts. Every soft touch, every moment she shared her food, every time she stood between them and danger, those small acts had shaped something powerful. To the cubs, she wasn't just a human passing by. She was their protector, the one who had chosen to see them when everyone else had walked away. The cadets whispered about it, some in disbelief, some in quiet respect. "Why do they follow her?" they asked one another. The answer was simple, though unspoken, because she had given them what no one else did: compassion. The cubs didn't measure strength in rank or in muscle. To them, strength was safety, and she was the only one who had given them that. As she bent down to check on the smallest one, the cub rested its head against her arm, almost as if claiming her. The others circled around, their eyes watchful but calm. It was then she felt it, something shift inside her. She wasn't just carrying them anymore. They had chosen her. For years, she had lived under the shadow of lowest cadet, measured by failures and shortcomings. But in the gaze of these fragile lives, she was not weak. She was alpha, not by force, but by care. The bond was silent, yet unbreakable. Every time the cubs curled against her side, every time they looked at her before taking a step, it became clearer. In their eyes, she had already become something greater than she ever believed possible. And for the first time, She didn't push that thought away. She accepted it. Maybe she wasn't leading the cadets. Maybe she wasn't the strongest in training. But to these cubs, she was everything. The storm had scattered the cadets, but when the instructors finally arrived to assess the damage, what they saw surprised them. The usual leaders, the loud and confident ones, were scattered and confused, still shaken by the chaos. But in the center of it all was the one they least expected, the cadet everyone had once dismissed. She was not standing tall with a commanding tone. Instead, she was kneeling beside the cubs, calming them with steady hands, while the other cadets quietly formed around her. It wasn't order by command. It was order born from trust. The instructors exchanged glances. They had called her the weakest, the one who lagged behind. Yet here she was, the anchor in the storm. The cadets weren't looking to the fastest runner or the strongest fighter. They were looking to her, the one who had not abandoned the helpless, the one who stayed calm when everything broke apart. It was a sight that words could not deny. When one cadet stumbled forward, still shaken, she offered him water before she even thought of herself. When another whispered, "What now?" she gave clear, simple directions, not out of pride, but out of necessity. No hesitation, no show of authority, just quiet leadership. The instructors had always taught that survival was about strength and speed, about pushing harder than the rest. But here, in this moment, they saw something more valuable: heart. And she had more of it than anyone else. One instructor finally said what all of them were thinking. "The lowest cadet?" "No, not anymore." The words carried more weight than she expected. She wasn't looking for recognition. She hadn't even realized the instructors were watching. But as she looked around and saw the cadet standing closer to her than anyone else, she understood. Respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned, not through words, but through actions. The title lowest began to fade that day. In its place, something new was quietly forming. She wasn't just another cadet anymore. She had shown them all that the strongest heart could outlast the strongest fists. And though she didn't smile or celebrate, a warmth filled her chest. For the first time, she felt truly seen. In the days that followed the storm, the atmosphere among the cadets changed. The nickname that once haunted her no longer held the same power. The others had witnessed something they couldn't ignore, a quiet strength that had guided them when fear had taken over. For the first time, her peers began to reflect on what leadership really meant. They had always believed it was about being the loudest in the group, the one who shouted commands or won competitions with speed and strength. But when danger struck, those qualities had faded quickly. The ones who had boasted the loudest were the first to scatter. It was her, the so-called weakest, who had stayed. She hadn't ordered anyone to follow her, yet they had. She hadn't claimed authority, yet when she spoke, they listened. Not because of force, but because they trusted her heart. The cadets began to notice the smaller things, too. How she still rose early to train, not to impress, but to improve. How she shared what little she had without hesitation. How she treated the cubs who had no voice, as if they mattered as much as the mission itself. These were not signs of weakness, as they once thought. They were signs of real strength. Around the fire, some admitted quietly, "Maybe we've been wrong about her." Others nodded, though pride kept them from saying more. Yet their actions revealed the truth. They stopped mocking her. Some even asked for her advice in training. The lesson became clear. Leadership was not about standing above others. It was about standing with them. It wasn't about shining in moments of ease, but enduring in moments of struggle. The cadets saw that loyalty wasn't earned through intimidation, but through compassion. And true endurance wasn't just about surviving. It was about carrying others with you. She didn't give speeches about it. She didn't claim she was right all along. She simply continued forward, doing what she always did, showing up, quietly giving her best. But this time, when she walked, she no longer walked alone. Her journey had shifted something greater than her own path. It had reshaped the way her peers understood strength. And in that silent transformation, she had given them a lesson no book or drill could teach. Titles had always carried weight at the academy. Some cadets were called the fastest, others the strongest, and a few the sharpest. For her, It had always been the lowest cadet, a name that followed her through every drill, every mistake, and every glance from her peers. It was a shadow she could never seem to escape, until now. The storm had changed everything. What once was an insult no longer matched the person she had become. Her peers had seen her courage when fear controlled them. They had seen her care when it was easier to look away. And they had seen her endurance when most gave up. Slowly, the whispers that once mocked her began to shift. It started quietly. A cadet, once quick to laugh at her, muttered, "She's not the lowest anymore." Another added, "The Cubs follow her for a reason." Soon the words spread, not as insults, but as acknowledgments. The Cubs, innocent and instinctive, had chosen her. And because of that, her peers began to see her differently. Not as weak, but as something rare. The instructors noticed it too. During drills, the cadets no longer left her behind. Instead, some naturally fell in line with her pace, looking to her when decisions needed to be made. Respect had crept into the way they spoke to her, not forced, but earned. The label, lowest cadet, lost its grip, falling away piece by piece. In its place came a new title, one she never asked for, but one she carried with quiet pride. She became known as the one chosen by the Cubs, not because of her rank or skill, but because of her heart. For the Cubs, the choice was instinctive. They did not care about titles or ranks. They cared about who protected them, who shared with them, who stayed when others walked away. And by choosing her, they had rewritten her story. The cadets followed their lead. What once was shame had turned into respect. Her new title carried more weight than any award the Academy could give, because it wasn't granted by authority. It was given by trust, and this time she wore it with strength, not sorrow. Graduation day came, and with it, the end of her time as a cadet. The titles, the drills, the long nights of doubt, all of it became part of her past. Yet her story did not end when she walked out of the academy gates. In truth, it was only the beginning. The instructors often told new cadets about the importance of discipline, courage, and strength. But now, alongside those lessons, they shared her story. They spoke of the cadet once called the lowest, the one no one believed would endure, and how she rose in the moment that mattered most. The younger recruits listened closely, for the tale wasn't about medals or awards. It was about heart. She had shown them that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice or the fastest runner. It was about staying true when things grew difficult, about standing firm when fear whispered to run, about caring when it was easier to ignore. The Cubs, too, became part of the Academy's memory. Their bond with her turned into a symbol, reminding everyone that compassion could be as powerful as strength. To the cadets who came after, she was not remembered as the weakest. She was remembered as the alpha, the one chosen not by rank, but by trust. Her peers, now grown and serving in different places, carried the lesson with them as well. Many admitted that she had changed how they thought about leadership forever. They remembered the storm, the fear, and how one cadet stood calmly in the middle of it all, shielding not only the Cubs, but also their spirits. Years later, when her name was mentioned, it no longer carried traces of pity. Instead, it carried respect. She had become proof that being underestimated was not the end of the story. Sometimes it was the very thing that built resilience, compassion, and unshakable strength. The walls of the academy held many stories, but hers lingered longest. Not because she started as the best, but because she refused to quit when she was called the worst. Her legacy was simple but unforgettable. True strength lives in those who choose to protect. Endure and rise, no matter what title they're given.